So the question, what are you going to do after, if you don't have a, if it's not clear what the next step is, you've got sort of conservatives on your right who are just saying, look, government, everything the government touches is terrible. You have liberals on the left who don't know exactly what to do next. And so it creates a pretty significant problem. And what I'm arguing in the book is that what happens is the federal government retreats. Local people don't accept that retreat. They step into the breach and say, look, we're going to do something about these communities. We're going to make them better. If it means a spaghetti dinner fundraiser and a raffle and we slap a coat of paint on that duplex and put some families into this neighborhood, that's what we're going to do. But it gets a lot more sophisticated than that. And there's some developments that I think a lot of the people in this room are really familiar with. So you have someone like Dorothy Mae Richardson in Pittsburgh who basically organizes her neighborhood to say, look, we're going to try to turn this place around. And she does that for other neighborhoods. She grows that organization that becomes NeighborWorks. I mean, it's a powerful institution we have in our country today. And the list goes on. You could talk about Pat Clancy in the community builders in Boston, Don Turner building bridge housing in San Francisco. All of these people are starting to do something in their communities without federal help. And what I argue in the book is that when we get to a third period rather, I don't want to mix my eras with my periods here. We get to a third period of housing policy, where you get our federal policymakers are stepping back and saying, wait a minute, something's working here at the local level. We're not sure exactly what it is, but if we could give them more resources, maybe they could grow it to a larger scale. And that, by about 1986, you used to get the low-income housing tax credit, the home investment partnership block grant program in 1990. You start seeing more resources from the community development block grant program that predates these programs moving towards housing. But you start seeing that to be this sort of the mechanism by which the federal government starts to create this quasi-market for affordable housing that is being met by these local groups. So what I'm arguing is that the sort of bureaucracy here, this sort of rational command control sort of organization, gets replaced by something that's more accurately thought of as a network. And the network's interesting because what it does is it allows you to leverage sort of resources, ideas, subsidy, global capital in a way that can get it into all the nooks and crannies of the network. So for example, you might have affordable housing developers out here. Maybe they go through their housing finance agency in their state to get some tax credits. They might get some help with some type of intermediaries like Liskin Enterprise to help them sort of structure their deals. And they're plugging into a bigger sort of connection, a bigger collection of resources in terms of money, subsidy, capital, ideas, best practices. And what happens is these innovations get moved through the system really effectively. And that's basically the system we have today. What you have is local groups. They're often nonprofit community development corporations, but they're sometimes for-profit firms as well. You have local government redevelopment agencies. You have counties. States play a role. Local banks, local community foundations, large foundations. You have a number of different institutions that play these intermediary roles, like Liskin Enterprise and NeighborWorks. And then you have these larger institutions that are trying to, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, back in the day, where they were buying up a lot of the, providing capital for this system. So you see how that's how that network developed. Now, I started this project thinking I was going to try to write a critique of this. I thought, the first title of my book was Nowhere to March. I felt like here was this system, it was impossibly complex, and if you really wanted to complain about it, where would you go, right? I mean, you used to you'd march on Washington. Well, it's really a state program administered by a CDC that has a, bank collaborate. I mean, it's not really clear where you'd even demonstrate if you were angry about affordable housing policy at some point. But I became a fan of the approach over time. But I want to go through some weaknesses and then some strengths, I think, of the program. So one weakness is incomplete. And I think one way to just even visualize this is in this network example, there are a lot of communities in this country that are not represented in this regime. I think the best treatment of this is the concentrated poverty report that we worked with Alan Berube on that shows we did 16 case study communities across the country. 15 of them are unrepresented in this system. We had some of our researchers go out to those communities and say, talk to bankers and say, why aren't you doing more low-income housing tax credit projects? And they say, what is the low-income housing tax credit, right? And so there are areas that are unrepresented, and that's a real problem. The other is that there's just a need for more resources. I mean, HUD takes a measure of what they call worst case needs. You know, people who are paying too much for their housing, or maybe have something like there's overcrowding perhaps. And that number hasn't really changed in the last 20 years. So as impressive as this system is, it's still only a holding action to getting people into decent, safe, affordable housing. Now, you saw that I made it seem like it was elegant with all, well, maybe I didn't, I don't know. It's sort of, there was that one network slide where all those pieces are moving. One of the things we do at the Federal Reserve quite a bit of is trying to get the bankers to talk to the foundation people who talk to the CDCs. Those people don't talk to each other as much as they should. And so there's real benefits to be had for getting the system to run more efficiently. But even more important, I think, is the need to sort of start branching out into other policy areas. So you have a situation where, you know, we know that low-income communities don't just need affordable housing. They need access to jobs and good schools and a number of other sort of services and resources that aren't provided in our network. And these links aren't being made today, and they need to be. Now, the strengths are some that I've already talked about. So the central one is that it combines local knowledge with national and international resources and best practices. I think that's really it's a powerful set of institutions that reach into communities all over the country. It's a real national treasure, and I hope that it manages to survive the economic crisis, because it took a long time to build it, and we hope we don't have a lot of those organizations go out of business. It's flexible and adaptable, so you use the same tools. You can use the tax credits, but let's say you're in one area where you have a lot of farming families and you need bigger apartments. You want 5-bedroom apartments. Well, you can still use the same low-income housing tax credit to do that. Or you might need efficiency units for people who are formerly homeless in an inner city location. Again, you can still use the same tools, and you can do, and it's very flexible in that regard. It also has this really interesting sort of self-regulating aspect to it, so that I think of it as sort of the for-profits keep the nonprofits efficient, and the nonprofits keep the for-profits honest. You know, nonprofits will come in and say, look, I'll do that deal in that tough neighborhood, and the for-profits step up and say, okay, I want those tax credits because I think I can make some money on this deal. I'll step up and work in that neighborhood as well. Meanwhile, of course, there's no excuses for nonprofits to say, well, I'm building at $10 per square foot when this other for-profit is building at $2 per square foot, right? You have to sort of match these sort of indexes together, and that I think is a very effective sort of self-regulating system. The politics of this is interesting, and I think you'd have to be a political junkie to get through the book and get through all the stories here. But honestly, this is stuff that would make a defense contractor blush. When you try to cut CDBG, or you want to try to cut the low-income housing tax credit, the coalition that locks into place is effective. And it's wild. It's like Wall Street bankers and nuns and, you know, and then the knives come out. I mean, it's just remarkable. I mean, it's actually kind of, I think, some compelling reading at a good price. And I think the last bit, I think this is really important, is it's an example for other policy areas. I'm going to touch on that a little bit later. So I'm going to skip through, I'm going to do these are 3 examples from the book. I have several case studies in the book, but I just want to just give you a flavor for it. And in all 3 cases, the main funding for all 3 of these is the low-income housing tax credits the first, home investment partnership block grant second, and CDBG third. This is an interesting project. It's built in Chinatown in Oakland. The need here was pretty obvious early on to some city officials, because they said, you know, Chinatown is really struggling with these strip malls in the suburbs. There's no parking here. And so the parking authority partnered with a local nonprofit and said, look, we'll give you the land. We just need 400 spaces of parking. So they did. So the East Bay Asian Local Development Corporation partnered with Bridge Housing to build this project. It's got like 14 layers of financing. I mean, I write about it at length in the book, but it has a first mortgage that's sized to what the tenants can pay in their rent. But it's a beautiful building. This picture was taken 20 years ago, and it looks exactly like that today. It's well managed, well maintained, and it's an anchor for that part of the city.